Well, this is a unique book for us, and for me personally, first time I've been able to write with my favorite daughter, and it's been very exciting to do that. She's a very gifted writer, and for years she's had her brothers writing stories about her that have been published, and her parents talked about her in stories and sermons, and the first time she can put her pen down and write.
Tell the truth, you know.
Tell the rest of the story. But this particular book is primarily for parents and for those that look at their kids and ask the question, is my child thriving right now? And not is my kid getting by, is my kid surviving, is my kid making it through? But as you look at each of your children, ask the question, is this child thriving? And if not, what adjustments do I need to make? And I suppose one of the greatest amounts of heartache that I've experienced in recent years have been parents who come up to me while I've been speaking at a conference somewhere, and they just weep and they're brokenhearted because these kids that showed such promise when they were young crash and burn and reject their faith, reject their values, do make heart-wrenching decisions with their life that have lifelong consequences, and they'll look and say, I sense that some things are wrong, or we knew we had some problems, but I didn't know what else to do. And so this book is all particularly for parents to say, let us help you examine what you're doing and ask the question, are there any adjustments you need to make so that your kid is not just getting by, but actually thriving where they are?
Well, one thing that's different from most parenting books is that instead of having two parents writing it together, we thought we'd take a different approach and have a parent and his child writing together, because we've joked about how there's a lot of parenting books about parents bragging about how amazing their kids all turned out, or there's books by these children talking about how horrible and tragic and how their parents messed up their whole lives and everything. So we thought it would be interesting to do a project together to kind of get both sides of it.
Yeah. As long as I got to write the last words in each chapter. But also, it's not a book where we just spell out step by step, this is what you do to be a good parent. But what we really do is we look at conventional wisdom. And conventional wisdom is what people just typically do in mass. And that oftentimes means how your parents raised you is how you default and typically raise your kids. Or what everyone else is doing, all the other parents in your church or in your school, what typically society says this is what a good parent does. And so without even thinking about it, we just kind of parent the same way. And we call that conventional wisdom. It's just considered by the majority of society to be the way you do it. But the reality is that the results aren't all that impressive. Statistics say perhaps 70% or more of young people that grow up going to church will walk away from the faith by the time they hit college. And so we see a lot of statistics that are saying, well, the conventional way of doing things is creating a lot of dysfunction and brokenness. And so maybe conventional wisdom isn't always the best way. And so really what this book is about is pushing back against stuff that parents have just assumed that's what parents do. And pushing back to say, no, it may be okay for one of your kids, but maybe not for the next child. So we just want you to think through carefully what you're doing and ask yourself, am I getting the results with this that I want for my children? And if not, do you have the courage to go against the way, the grain everyone else is going and do something totally different for the sake of your child?
Well, I think it really depends on the kid and listening to what it is that the kid is wanting. For me, in grade 7, I was attending a public school, and I was doing okay there. I'd gotten good grades, I had friends, my teacher liked me, but I just started feeling kind of restless there, and I knew that I was spending all day at a school being shuttled from one class to the next, and then getting up early and being tired. And while it wasn't a horrible thing, I wasn't getting bullied or anything like that, I just knew that if I decided to pull out and start homeschooling, I would have a lot more options, and I would have the freedom to do different things. I would be able to travel with my dad some. I would be able to take the figure skating lessons I'd always wanted. I'd be able to go to youth group activities without having to stay home and stay up really late at night trying to finish my homework. That really was a lot of busy work at the time. And so I didn't know how my parents would think about me making such a drastic change, and so I actually made a list of pros and cons that I would take to them, kind of to soften them up a little bit and show them that I actually had thought about it. I wasn't just, tired of getting up early and wanted to quit school like every other kid. So it ended up being a really long list of all the pros of what would be a benefit of homeschooling, and then I could only really think of one negative, and that was that I had a really good friend at school that I was going to miss. And so I brought it home, I showed it to them, and at first my dad wasn't very familiar with homeschooling because he grew up in a family where you go to public school and it doesn't matter if you like it or not, that's just kind of the way it is. And so at first I think you're a little bit skeptical at first, but by the next week I'd actually pulled out of school and I loved it right from the very beginning. Like, there was a noticeable change in me, I think, from that point on, and I ended up homeschooling right through to high school graduation, and I think looking back it was probably one of the best decisions that I ever made.
That's a classic case for us because she wasn't struggling at school. She was actually doing fine, getting good grades. She was a teacher's pet. So as a parent, you look at that and say, why rock the boat? Like, things were fine. Like, if she was flunking or she was being bullied every day, well, we need to intervene, but it's fine. Let's not worry about that. But what we discovered ultimately was that fine wasn't good enough for her. She wanted the best. She wanted to thrive. She wasn't going to thrive there. For instance, in phys ed class, they had 8 weeks of flag football. And here's my princess wanting to do horseback riding and figure skating. She's flag football. And she's spending a whole lot of her time doing stuff she has no interest in, no joy in. But that's what you do. That's because you're all in a herd and you keep being, moved one place to the next. And so for us, it was hard because we never thought about homeschooling, or we saw no need to. So we had to completely change our perspective. And so what does the parents do? And it's going to require more work on our part, especially my wife's part, and a change in plans. And you start to think of all the problems and all the logistics, and well, never done that, can't afford to do that. And at a certain point, and then we had a lot of well-meaning friends come to us and share conventional wisdom with us. And they would say, well, your kid will be a social misfit if you pull them out of school, and they'll
never go to college.
They won't be able to get into college because they won't have good enough grades and education. And of course, all the advice we were given was by people who'd never done it. They'd never homeschooled, they were unfamiliar with it. It's just the conventional wisdom that they had heard other people say. And as we look back later, we thought if we had based our parenting on the wisdom shared with us from all the people around us, we would have missed out on an amazing journey that Carrie got to go on. And so that's really our counsel to others. It's not that we think everybody should homeschool. It's that when you begin to sense in your heart that what's happening with your kid is not the best, do you have the courage to do whatever it takes, even when other people come along and say, it won't work, it's too expensive, it's too much trouble. As parents, you have to ask yourself, I'm responsible to help these children thrive, and maybe it means doing something no one else is doing. And no one in my family had ever homeschooled before. We'd never considered that before, but it just became apparent that's what God wanted us to do for her, and so we did. And she ultimately went into university, was a 4.0 student, all kinds of awards. She's working on 2 master's degrees today. Obviously, they didn't hurt her academically or socially, that we went with what God was telling us to do. And so the message of the book is, what is it God is impressing on your heart that you need to do for one of your kids? Are you willing to trust Him with that and go for it, even if you never thought of doing that before? And what do you want to do to help each of your kids thrive?
There's definitely a ton of homeschool stereotypes. And to be honest, sometimes they're true. But from pretty much probably the first week that I started homeschooling, I started getting some negative comments from people. And I think a lot of times they weren't trying to be insulting, they just were trying to be a good friend and be like, don't you want to go to college one day? Or, shouldn't you hang out with people that's not your mom? And all of that. And it would be hard sometimes. I would get frustrated in it. Even though I really loved what I was doing, sometimes if you're getting some of that feedback from people, especially someone who's maybe more of an authority than you. I had even, adults and people that I respected who genuinely cared about me, but they didn't know me as well as I knew myself and as well as my parents knew me. And so yeah, I mean, it was definitely a struggle. And I think anytime that you do something that goes against the norm of what everyone's doing, you're going to face that. So part of the thing is just being okay and being sure enough in what you're doing that it doesn't really matter what other people are saying.
Well, I certainly appreciate her writing style. I've really enjoyed that, and she's very concise and very witty, and so the style, I think, and her perspective on things has been, I've really enjoyed that, and I think this will be a great book because I really just wanted to showcase some of her great storytelling ability. It's a very enjoyable book to read. A lot of wisdom lays throughout, but also just a lot of just humor and just fun, and I think that's one of the things as a parent we really hoped each of our kids would develop. It was just a great sense of humor. I think that comes when you're thriving, when you're enjoying your childhood, you enjoy what you do, you have the time just to enjoy, have fun and to laugh, and so that comes through a lot, I think, through her writing as well. And it's always great to get that perspective. As parents, you always see things from one side, and to see the child's perspective, even though you're looking at the very same event, has been very refreshing.
Yeah, I think we've learned a lot about each other, and through the whole process of writing this book, I think we've been able to really articulate some things that we'd always done, but we'd never really necessarily consciously thought about. And so I think I've learned a lot about him and about myself, and even just like some of the stuff I feel like we're learning kind of as we go along and as we've been really working on the material for this book.
And we didn't realize what rebels we were at times. People look at our kids, they've all turned out great, and so people say, well, how did you do that? And you start to look at all the stuff that you did as a parent, and you realize most parents didn't do that. Like rules. Most parents think, well, if you had such good kids, you must have a lot of rules, a lot of restrictions, you kept tight rein on these children so they didn't stray. It was just the opposite. I don't think our kids probably had 3 rules. We didn't have a curfew. You ask them what time, we didn't have a bedtime. It's just amazing. But, a lot of people, that really shocks them because they think we must have been mayhem in your house. But we always aimed at character instead of rules. And I know parents who pride themselves in lots of rules, and they're always aware of their kids and spying on them and checking up on them. But that oftentimes is a reflection of poor parenting. That because they've never been able to speak to their kids' heart and character, they've got to surround them with a police force to make sure that they follow the rules. And so a lot of things we did, I think even as we were writing this book, we began to look and to say, but it's actually kind of shocking how many times we veered away from conventional wisdom and did it differently. But at the end of the day, the product is great. And for us, it wasn't about, you can get to the end number of different ways. It's about the product. Are you pleased with how your kids have turned out? And if you are, there's various ways to parent your kids to get there. You just have to pick the one that's going to work for that particular child.